It looked like Bob Hope and Bing Crosby were the right pair for films in 1947. But there was a sad truth behind their well-known road films. Crosby called him a useless hack, wouldn't go to his roasts, and wouldn't let their wives hang out with other women. After many years, the real story of how two comedy legends went from being friends to foes comes to light, along with the shocking betrayal that led to it, and finally broke them up. There was a place in London called Eltham where Bob Hope was born on May 29, 1903, as Leslie Towns Hope. William, his father, was a slater from Somerset. Avis, his mother, was a light opera artist from Wales. English life was hard and money was tight. William chose to believe that things would get better in the future. He came to live in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1907, where his brothers were already working as plumbers and steamfitters, and 6 boys. Their trip on the SS Philadelphia was in 3rd class, and they arrived at Ellis Island on March 30, 1908. When the customs officers wrote down their information, they wrote that Bob was 2 years old instead of 4. On formal papers for years, that mistake stuck with him. It was hard to live in Cleveland. The Hope family had a hard time making ends meet. They lived in a small house near Doan's Corners. They often took in people from the borders and never stopped supporting her kids. She taught Bob how to sing and helped him develop the funny side of him that was already there. He liked to act like other people, tell jokes, and do little dance moves. When money was tight, his mom made sure he had chances to improve his skills. Bob's first real time on stage was when he was 10 years old. He won a contest at Cleveland's Luna Park to see who looked most like Charlie Chaplin. He loved how exciting it was to be on stage. However, fun wasn't his main goal at that time. He became interested in boxing instead. He fought in the Ohio Novice Boxing Championships in 1919 under the name Packy East, which was a salute to the boxer Packy McFarland. He won 3 fights, but lost the last one. He made fun of the fact that he spent more time painting than Picasso as he got older. Bob worked every job he could find to support his family. He worked as a soda jerk, sold shoes, sold newspapers, and even tried trick pool. He meets a lot of different kinds of people at these jobs. He watched what made them laugh, talked, and moved. He wasn't aware that he was gathering information that would later shape his comedy. By the 1920s, he was paying more attention to fun things. Pros taught him how to dance, and Johnny Root and King Rastus Brown were 2 of them. This helped him get small stage gigs. Mildred Rosequist was his first singing partner, but her mother wouldn't let her go on trips, so he switched to Lloyd Durbin and then George Byron. In the beginning, he played in small places like the Bandbox Theater in Cleveland. He kept working hard, getting better, and moving up. A big comedy stage in the country, New York City's Palace Theater, was his home by 1931. Bob learned how to act in vaudeville. At that time, most comedians stuck to scripted acts, but he came up with a style that seemed more natural. He liked to talk to the people in the crowd instead of just telling jokes that he had practiced. One thing that made him stand out from other performers was that he mixed dancing with quick one-liners. He moved from theater to radio by the late 1930s. He hosted The Intimate Review in 1935 and The Atlantic Family from 1935 to 1936, which were his first radio shows. He became known through these early shows, but it was the Pepsi Show with Bob Hope that made him a national star. When the Pepsi Show first came out on NBC, it was a huge hit right away. It was the most watched show in America in the early 1940s. Even though more than 10 years had passed, millions of people tuned in every week to hear what Hope had to say next. He wasn't like other comics of the time in the way he did things. Hope turned himself into a joke, while most radio stars played made-up roles. He kept his jokes fresh by making them about real life and events. He told them to read the newspaper and make jokes out of the headlines. Every week, they came up with a lot of jokes, but Hope only chose the best ones. This fast-paced style paved the way for the one-man shows on late-night talk shows that would come decades later. People took notice of his accomplishments. 3 Peabody Awards were given to him. This is one of the greatest awards in broadcasting. The first one was in 1944 and was for his work to boost spirit during the war. The Peabody Committee praised his hard work and said that the troops would always be happy because of him. In the future, he won more Peabody Awards for his work in radio and TV. What was the Pepsi Show at its height? It was not only the most famous radio show, it was a part of American culture. That it was number 1 from 1942 to 1944 showed that humor could be more than just fun. It might bring people together. In bad times, it might make you feel better. Hope's impact never went away. even after radio stopped. He was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame in 1990. It was the last honor for a guy who had changed the world of comedy for decades. That's not how Bob Hope got his start in Hollywood. Going Spanish, a short movie he made in 1934, was his first movie part. He later joked that it was so bad that it should be used as punishment. He became known for that funny style. Sharp, aware of themselves, and always delivered at the right time. People loved him because he didn't take himself too seriously. The Big Show of 1938 was his big break. It wasn't just another band-themed sitcom. It made everyone remember to be thankful. The song was a big hit right away when Hope and Shirley Ross sang it together. The words were both sweet and funny, and the melody became a part of who he was. It showed everything that people liked about him. They have charm, humor, and a touch of earnestness. Hope was a big radio star by the late 1930s. However, Hollywood was a different test. His parts in films used his natural ability to make people laugh. He was always getting into trouble because he talked too quickly and was too sure of himself. A great example is The Cat and the Canary, which came out in 1939. It was both scary and funny, and Hope played a nervous hero. The mix of humor and tension worked, and people couldn't get enough of him. After that, there was Road to Singapore, 1940. This was the start of something famous. Hope worked with Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour in a series called Road to Films. This was the first movie in the series. There was everything in these films: music, excitement, and comedy all the time. They got along so well, Hope and Crosby. Crosby was the cool guy who could talk. Hope was the cowardly schmuck. Love was the woman they were both after. The unique thing about these pictures was how real they seemed. The writing didn't have a lot of the funny parts. Hope and Crosby were always making things up on the spot. They made jokes at each other and even broke the fourth wall. People loved how lively the films were because of their quick banter. There were more than 20 books in the series, and Road to Morocco, 1942, was one of the most well-known. The method was easy to understand and always worked. It was clear that Hope and Crosby were having fun, not just playing. Outside of the road, too, Hope showed that he could carry a movie by himself. He was great at making fun of classic styles and turning them into funny comedies. A great example is The Pale Face, which came out in 1948. He played a weak dentist who became a Western hero by mistake. That it was silly to think of Hope as a shooter was what made it funny. He wasn't a tough guy. He played the person who got into too much trouble but made it out alive. My favorite brunette showed that he still loved making fun of other things. 1947 was a comedy that made fun of detective films. The 1940 movie The Ghost Breakers was a mix of horror and humor, with Hope trying to make it through the night in a haunted house. He wasn't like most movie stars. He didn't fight his way out of trouble. He got out of it by talking. He was different from other leading guys at the time because of that. The beginning of something great was Bob Hope's first USO tour on May 6, 1941. That night, he did his NBC radio show live in front of troops at March Field in California. He had never done anything like that before, and it was a big moment for the USO, which had only been around for a few months. An army of people crowded the place, eager to see a Hollywood star perform just for them. Hope entertained them with a mix of music and comedy, but more than that, he made them laugh. His jokes were short and sharp, and they were made just for them. It was weird to hear about the strange things that happen on military sites and how they live their daily lives. It wasn't a polished show at the theater. It felt close to home. They laughed out loud in response. Hope knew right then that he had found his most important audience. Everything changed because of that show. Hope performed at bases and camps all over the U.S. for the next year and a half. Then there was World War II, and he took his act to other countries. He traveled to some of the world's most risky spots from 1941 to 1945. He did shows in Europe and the Pacific, and many of them were close to war zones. In 2 months, he went 30,000 miles. He played more than 150 shows in Hawaii, New Guinea, and Australia. Some places didn't have much else built up. It was hard to trust the tools, and the stages were not very good. It didn't bother him. It was the soldiers that counted. Hope's trips were dangerous. The Germans kept an eye on him because they knew how important he was to American confidence. Cities where he had just played were soon bombed. He never gave up, even when it was dangerous. What he did, he made jokes about what would happen if a bomb went off close. He made fun of himself for being there when things were rough. People in the army loved him for it. His performances were more than just funny. They made the troops miss home. To make the shows feel special, he brought in singers, bands, and dancers. There were differences between each show. He made his jokes fit the audience, the setting, and the time. He wasn't just making men laugh. He was getting in touch with them. In time, Hope turned into more than just a funny person. People saw him as a figure because they saw him as one of them and knew what they were going through. His trips around Christmas were very important. During the Korean War, he performed in the cold, sometimes just a few miles from fighting zones. People back home didn't agree with him about the war in Vietnam, but he never stopped showing up for the troops. Some of his most important trips were in Vietnam. Stars from Hollywood like Margaret and Raquel Welch came to perform with him. To avoid strikes by setting up stages in different places to make enemies confused. For the soldiers, these shows will never be forgotten. A lot of people had never seen a live show before, let alone one with famous people from home. Hope was always committed. He went to Saudi Arabia during Operation Desert Shield in 1990, when he was 87 years old. He had been performing for troops for almost 50 years on 57 USO tours that took place in many wars and on many countries. He was made an honorary hero by Congress. He cared more about that title than any other award or prize. Bob Hope first appeared on TV in 1947 as the host of the first commercial show on KTLA in Los Angeles. But it wasn't until April 9, 1950, when NBC's Star Spangled Review gave him his big break. On this variety show, he performed his sharp speeches, funny sketches, and songs live on TV. It was an easy step up from radio, and the audience stuck with it. The show was live from New York and was the first time he worked with NBC for a long time. Hope didn't want to commit to a weekly show, so she focused on TV events. This choice gave him the freedom to keep making high-quality projects while also working on films and USO trips. His early success on TV made him stand out. He signed a long-term deal with NBC in 1950, which meant he would be on the air for decades. When TV came out, radio had a hard time keeping up. What Hope said, and when she said it worked just as well on screen as they did on TV. He was one of the most famous names in show business by the early 1950s. People have been watching his Christmas shows for a long time. During World War II, he started singing for U.S. troops. In 1954, he started filming these shows to show on TV. In these shows, he went all over the world to perform for Neil Armstrong and Raquel Welch. They weren't just holiday shows. They were times for troops far from home to meet with each other. One of the best ones played in January 1970. At the time, this was the most popular entertainment show on TV, with 64% of viewers tuning in for his Vietnam Christmas show. While soldiers were in the middle of a controversial war, the Pope's trips were more than just fun. They made me think of home. During Operation Desert Shield in 1990, his Christmas shows kept going on while he was on tour with the USO. These shows made him more famous than just a comic. He used his skill to make people who were helping their country feel better. Hope's TV specials used a formula that would later be used by variety shows and late-night talk shows. In his opening speeches, he talked about current events in a funny way. Each show had music, comedy skits, and famous people as guests. His sense of humor made him easy to relate to, even when he was on stage with the biggest stars in Hollywood. He was also the host of Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater from 1963 to 1967. This was an anthology show with both serious plays and variety shows. This showed how versatile he was as an artist and a producer. He was the host of more than 300 TV shows between 1950 and 1996, leaving a legacy that changed American entertainment. Is full of contradictions. We still don't know much about his first marriage to Grace Louise Troxell. Together in Vaudeville, they got married on January 25, 1933, in Erie, Pennsylvania. The couple was no longer married by November 1934. What's strange about this is that Hope later said it never happened. Some PR people even said the marriage license was a mistake, but court records showed it wasn't. Even though Troxell said no, Hope kept sending her money for the rest of her life. 1976, she was still getting money from the man who said she was never his wife. The story gets even stranger when you look at the dates. Hope started an affair with Dolores Reed in the middle of 1933, while she was still legally married to Troxell. Reed was a Ziegfeld performer who had just joined his vaudeville troupe, Hope later said. He married Reed in February 1934, but his divorce from Troxell wasn't finalized for months. This brings up a serious question. Was Hope a bigamist, or did he just make up facts about his second marriage? No proof of marriage or wedding pictures of Hope and Reed have ever been found. Biographers such as Richard Zoglin have asked if their marriage was ever officially recognized. Reed didn't seem to care if it wasn't. She once said she wouldn't have stayed if their marriage wasn't good. No matter what the truth was, Hope and Reed were together for almost 70 years, until Reed died in 2003. They took 4 kids from a home in Evanston, Illinois: Linda, Anthony, Kelly, and Eleonora. They also took care of Tracy Shore, who is the daughter of famous New York bar owner Bernard Tutts Shore. The family kept up a close public image, even though Hope had long breaks and affairs that were widely known. Reed worked hard to raise the kids, while Hope became one of the most popular entertainers in America. Hope lied about being a loving husband and a devoted Catholic. Hope slept with a lot of young actors and showgirls. Some didn't last long. Some went on for years. These stories were kept secret by his charm and power. But one affair almost made him too public in a way he couldn't hide. In 1949, Hope met Barbara Payton, who was becoming a big star in Hollywood. She was young, pretty, and driven. He was still interested in Hope, even though she was married. He gave her lots of gifts and put her up in a fancy flat. They had an affair in secret for 6 months. Wished for more. She pushed for more money and a stronger commitment. Hope said no because she is known for being careful with money. By August, he was over it. In order to keep her quiet, he paid her back and left. Their relationship stayed a secret for years. Hope stuck to his routine and moved on to other people. His team did a lot to keep his image in check. Any rumors were quickly put to rest. But Payton finally spoke out in 1956. Her career had fallen apart. She was having trouble with money and her personal life. She was so desperate that she sold her story to Confidential. In the interview, she showed Hope in a way that no one else had. He was cold, controlling, and cruel, she said. She told him things about their affair that broke his image as a good person. Hope didn't say anything back. There was no way he was going to help the situation get better. After the harm was done, his PR team took over. The story went away, and Hope's career kept going. It wasn't so good for Payton. When you spoke out against a strong man in Hollywood, bad things happened. Her work never got better. She fell down, more into poverty and drug abuse. She had lost her fame by the time she died in 1967. Hope, on the other hand, kept living his 2 lives. It was well known in Hollywood that he had been seeing actress Marilyn Maxwell for a long time, but the public never learned about it. In a different partnership, I was with Miss World winner Rosemary Franklin for almost 30 years. People who knew him well said that young women would wait outside his hotel rooms when he gave tours. Women who wanted to be actors, models, or beauty queens were among them. Bob Hope liked the attention, but he never let his relationships get in the way of his work. Reed told her about his affairs, but she didn't mind. She said in an interview in 1978 that she didn't think her husband would ever be 100% true blue. Still, she picked to stay. It could have been her Catholic religion. It could have been a smart choice. No matter what the reason was, she stayed by his side. No one else ever took her place, even after all the affairs. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby were never meant to work together. Began filming Road to Singapore. 5 other pairs turned down the script. Jack Oakey and Fred McMurray said no. George Burns and Gracie Allen did the same thing. The company was running out of things to do. Hope was becoming more popular as a comedian after The Cat and the Canary, but he wasn't a movie star yet. He was Crosby. The studio chose to take a chance and put them together. There was no closeness between Hope and Crosby, even though they had met on the radio and in person. The lead woman was Dorothy Lamour. Hope came in third because Crosby was the big name. When filming began in October 1939, the 2 stars quickly got into a groove. They started to make things up on the spot, cracking jokes and breaking the fourth wall. Almost half of the dialogue in the movie wasn't in the draft at all. Victor Schertzinger, the director, was mad, but the people who saw it loved it. The movie did well. Hope and Crosby had found something that worked, and Paramount thought there could be more. After that, they worked together on 6 more road films. The relationship wasn't what it seemed like on screen, and Crosby didn't hold out much hope for it in real life. He called him a talented hack more than once. Crosby wasn't joking. He was shy and liked being alone. Hope, on the other hand, was outgoing and liked being around other people. On set, Crosby stayed to himself, reading race results or sitting alone, while Hope talked to the crew. They didn't hang out outside of work. Even their wives never went out together. Their differences were also clear when Crosby didn't show up to a Friars Club roast honoring Hope. People knew who he was because he was on the club's board. He didn't say why he skipped it when asked. I wasn't hungry. One more thing was money. At first, Crosby was a bigger star than Hope, so he made almost twice as much on the first road movie. That made Hope mad. By 1947, he had changed the terms of his deal and was now making the same amount of money as Crosby. But they were always competing with each other. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby were rivals in real life as well as in movies. Their steady back and forth made the movies even funnier. In Road to Bali, 1952, Hope told the crowd, "He's going to sing, folks. It's time to get some popcorn." As they went on interviews and public events, they kept up the act. Hope once said, "I wouldn't do anything for Bing, and he wouldn't do anything for me. And that's how we live our lives. We don't do anything for each other." Their jokes hid any real stress, making them look like they couldn't live without each other. They were never really that close, but the public saw them as two sides of the same coin, always fighting and making things fun. Bob Hope went to the funeral of his old friend Jimmy Stewart when he was 94 years old. Some people said he looked very weak. He took the stage at the 50th anniversary of the Primetime Emmy Awards the next year. He got Milton Berle and Sid Caesar to join him. There were also famous people in the crowd, like Fay Wray and Gloria Stewart. That made him well known. When the Bob Hope Gallery of American Entertainment opened at the Library of Congress in 1999, he was there. Two big exhibitions about his life and work were held to honor him. He played in one of his last public events at the Hope Classic Golf Tournament the next year, when he was 97 years old. He gave the Swedish player Jesper Parnevik a big hug. His health was getting worse by that time. After a year, he went to the hospital with pneumonia. No matter how old he is, ever do. In 2003, on May 29th, he turned 100 years old. The city of Los Angeles changed the name of the area where Hollywood and Vine meet to Bob Hope Square. It was Bob Hope Day in 35 states. He still had a good sense of humor back then. He made a joke, "I'm so old that they've taken away my blood type." Hope had never told anyone about his faith. He became a Catholic, though, 7 years before he died. In a strange way, he also came close to dying. In 1998, 5 years before he died, the Associated Press wrote an obituary for him that was sent out by mistake. The U.S. House of Representatives even said he was dead before they realized he was still living. It got harder for him to move in his last few years, but he was mostly healthy for most of his old age. Bob Hope died at his home in Toluca Lake, California, in the morning of July 27, 2003. He had been 100 years old for 2 months. In the end, his grandson said that Hope's wife Dolores asked him where he wanted to be buried as he lay dying. He just said, "Surprise me." At San Fernando Mission Cemetery, his body was buried in a tomb vault. After some time, they were moved to the Bob Hope Memorial Garden, which was built next to the graveyard. Dolores lived for 8 more years and died at the age of 102. Artists from all over the world made tributes to him after he died. Many drew longtime friend Bing Crosby, who died in 1977, to greet him in heaven. It was a great way to say goodbye and make people laugh.